Well, based upon the single British Made, it seems like form and function plays a role in the way your mind works. And
Yes,
then
yeah.
and then the way it presents itself in your music often. Um, Now, for those who haven't heard British Made, it will be played during the show. Um, the Jaguar 9600, um, was it? Did you pick that out for a certain reason? Was it like the 60th anniversary, or was it like only the third car? Well, at the time, third car inducted into the Museum of Modern Art based upon its design. I mean, what made you choose that? I have a follow up to that, but I'm curious as to the initial choice.
That was really easy, really. I wanted I built this sort of whole backstory about the character within the album, being a Spitfire pilot, and he was looking back on his life at his present time of age 99, and what one sort of part of the backstory was his love of physical great machines, great sort of things that of his youth, and one of those things was enjoying a sports car, and that's where the sort of E-type Jaguar came in. And the reason for that particular car was that it was really revered at the time in 1960 as possibly the most beautiful design of car ever built. Not so much for its dynamics, which were pretty good as well, but just for the sheer jaw-dropping beauty of it. So it's form rather than its function. And to the extent that all its sort of competitors like Ferrari, even Enzo Ferrari himself said it was the most beautiful design that he'd ever seen. And he'd seen some beautiful designs, obviously being the head of Ferrari. So,
Yes.
it was that level of, I wanted the most extreme example of a machine that was purely built for its jaw-dropping gorgeousness, if you like. The ultimate in form versus function.
It's interesting to me that that period of time when the car was manufactured, because it was manufactured from 60 or 61 to
Yeah.
1974. That era encapsulates a lot of things in both of our countries. I mean, in America, it took us from the Kennedy era to the Nixon era. And I was wondering, and also let's face it, that also encapsulates perhaps a great era of music, since this is a music show. It just so happens that it lots of people probably would argue that that same time period is the best in the history of rock music. Now, I'm not talking about the birth of rock and roll, going back to the 50s. I'm talking about when rock and roll changed and started changing people's thoughts and the way they perceive music, as much as they perceived something like a functional piece of equipment. Did that play into it at all?
I think those things certainly, those two decades, the 60s and 70s, and like you say, literally all of you can almost put everything in popular music in those two decades, really. That's anything true. That's sort of significance and importance in terms of the whole thing we now know as rock music and everything else. I mean, the whole sort of popularization birth of the record industry is happening then, and the genres sort of multiplying like branches off off that, really. So I think, like you say, I think that happening was probably a product of all the incredible other stuff that was happening at the time, in our two countries. Certainly as I've written albums for before, the space race and that sort of thing certainly galvanizes that, but also the threat of war, dealing with war and all the aftermath of war as it was, and then also going into other wars, particularly thinking sort of Vietnam and things in your country and that sort of era, and the recognition of peace and that sort of thing. But all sorts of other threats. We had the fuel crisis then as well in the sort of early 70s, didn't we? Which
yes,
was another threat to great automotive design at that time. So yeah, all of those rich, almost political events, if you like, or changes in climate, as you could call them, not necessarily in the climate we talk about with the Earth, but in terms of the climate of people and how they live. All of that gets fed into the music, I think, and that's why it's so rich and diverse, and it changes so rapidly. I mean, I'll give you another example. We had one of my favorite eras is the transition from sort of late 60s heavy rock into metal. That's just such a fascinating period, and the sort of you know, the movement within the Midlands, where heavy industry was sort of serving our country, and that sort of gave birth to bands like Black Sabbath, and the music perfectly matches the you know, the tempo and the heat and everything else of the industry and the furnaces that they were working in. So again, you know, I think you're bang on the money there. I think it's the music comes out of those environments and those changes. Yeah, for sure.
It's funny. That's funny that you brought up Black Sabbath as an example, because I mean, they went from being known as Earth, I think.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they became Black Sabbath. So even within something as small, if you want to call it small, as a rock band, it had an impact on that band, you know, in a certain way.
Yeah, and even bands like the Beatles, you know, they were starting to get tired of the pop sound, and they were experimenting in other areas. And you got, you know, a track that I particularly enjoy, Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
Also a contender for hold on a minute, something's changed quite dramatically here. We have the birth of heavy rock music coming in, and it's crossing over into heavy metal in a very sort of subtle way. So all of these things don't happen by accident. They happen, I think they happen because the people that are writing these tunes are very much soaking in all the what's going on around them.